Woke
Joining us
supremacy
now, Trump's former personal attorney and former vice president for the Trump Organization, Michael Cohen. He's also the host of the Mea Culpa podcast and the author of the forthcoming book, Revenge: How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics. It is out next month. And I want to get to, if you're willing to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit about what we can see in there. But I just, it's the first time we've had a chance to talk to you about you as the connective tissue. And she mentioned you. She thanks you for your cooperation. And we had a sense, I think from Donnie Deutsch and others, that you were very cooperative with the multiple investigations into Trump. Did you think it would come to this lawsuit that you saw this week?
Well, I didn't think it would be a 200-page indictment, to be very honest with you. And I am extremely thankful to our tenacious and our just our fierce Attorney General, Tish James. The shout out was extremely appreciative because I spent over 400 hours speaking to 7 different congressional committees, law enforcement, Attorney General, District Attorney, and so on. And to be recognized and acknowledged for it was extremely, it was appreciated.
Did you, I mean...
But I never thought there would be a 200-page indictment. I knew of almost all of these actions that she talks about, but I didn't think that you needed 200, right? Like the Al Capone effect. You're not going to get them on murder, extortion, racketeering. You get them on tax evasion. And much of this, especially the easier, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that was available a long time ago. And all I can say is she's possibly one of the most thorough attorney generals in this country.
Well, what she seems to have marshaled from your cooperation is the actual receipts. I mean, she says we have Mazar's documents and they've turned over documents. She says Cushman and Wakefield is under investigation. She says we're talking to Deutsche. When you have those 3 pieces plus your testimony, is it just an open and shut case of fraud? It
looks like it to me, and it should look like it that way to everybody. In fact, I think that Donald acknowledges that this looks like an open and shut case because he looks terrible right now. I mean, you know, going on Sean Hannity, listening to the ramblings, as you know, from the old movie Young Frankenstein, the nonsensical rantings of a lunatic mind. I mean, that's what it was. It was the stupidest, you know, conversation between these 2 individuals, and yet they put it on television. It was amazing.
It was amazing, and there have been other moments. You know, I was told by people who are still in Trump's corner in his camp that you had the ability to take him down because of how much you knew. What have the last 5 years been like for you and your family?
Pain, nothing but pain. Watching my family suffer, the pain. I talk a lot about it in the book, Revenge. Why? Because I am responsible for the Stormy Daniels payment. Yet, nevertheless, the Southern District of New York basically put a gun to my wife's head and said, Michael, you either plead guilty on a Friday night at 5:30 to a Monday, or we're filing an 80-page indictment that's going to include your wife. And I'm like, there was no way in the world I was going to put her through this nonsense. And so I never thought the judge was going to give a 36-month sentence. I thought it would be financial. There would be some sort of a penalty. So when I started to realize that Donald was behind it, and it's where I go into the book and I provide not my statements, because Donald is excellent. He's an excellent marketer. He manages, whether it's the little Marco Rubio, you know, it's the Lion Ted, whether it's, which is funny that they're so close now, right? Don't worry, Ted, you're going to go into the bus soon, too. Right? And then you start talking about all of the other people, right? Low energy jet. He labeled me a liar. And therefore, my credibility came into question, which is why probably Alvin Bragg claims to people that I wouldn't be a credible witness. Nonsense. When I went and testified before the House Oversight Committee, one of the things that I did is I knew that every Republican was going to attack me on credibility. Why? Because I know the playbook. I wrote it, and I told them I know what you're doing. Not one of them asked me a single question about Donald. And so that's where Revenge goes into. And I lay out, not from my words, but from FBI agents, former FBI agents, current FBI agents, judges, prosecutors, in their words, not mine, explaining what was going on here. And all of this was created by a president who didn't want to be a president. He wanted to be king. Listen to the Sean Hannity.
Yeah,
Only
crazy.
a king can think. and turn around and declassify with
I think
thoughts.
even a king has to declare things so. I mean, I think this is post...
Maybe 1700s.
Yeah.
But, all of a sudden I was talking about this the other night when I was on another program, and I said, I hope he doesn't have that ability because I feel like my throat's closing. Maybe he's thinking about choking me, but I guess his power doesn't exist because I'm still here.
What do you think is his state? He was obsessed with taking that MOCA test, which is a metric. It's actually a very serious metric for cognitive decline, sometimes used as a screen for Alzheimer's. Why do you think he took it publicly so many times while he was president?
Because he didn't know what it was for. The people that are around him are as incompetent as he was in running this country. And so he had no idea that it was a cognitive test. He thought that it was
just
some
yelling,
sort of
tomato, tomato.
He thought it was an intelligence test. You can't make this stuff up. Folks, this is America.
What happened to you? I mean, take us through what happened to you at the hands of the Bill Barr Justice Department.
No, I mean, again, I talk about that extensively in the book. All of a sudden, I'm released based upon COVID, based upon what they call comorbidities. I had several years earlier blown a whole series of pulmonary embolus, which shut down my lungs, and I have respiratory and cardiac issues as a result. And so I was released. Interestingly enough, when they were releasing me, they then pulled it back. And then all the files then had to go to Washington for approval. Then my wife had to go find the 300 pages from Lenox Hill Hospital where I was treated in ICU and so on. To make a long story short, what happens? I go for an ankle monitor, and I'm sitting with Adam Pakula and a woman named Enid Phoebus over at Department of Probation. And they're supposed to put the ankle monitor on me, and I had my son waiting in front of the building. All of a sudden, they tell me, well, we need you to sign this 2-page document. And it's not a 2-page document that looks like any federal document that you've ever seen, because it doesn't exist. They wrote it specifically for me. And the very first paragraph prohibits me from publishing a book, speaking to media. It's a complete infringement on my First Amendment constitutional right. And I brought a friend of mine named Jeff Levine, who's a lawyer. I've known him forever. We go there because I felt something was wrong, and I wanted a witness. And so he turns around and he goes, well, how can my client possibly sign this? It's a violation of his First Amendment constitutional right. Not only could I not speak, no member of my family could speak, neither could any friends. I mean, it was so overbroad. That being said, they asked us to wait in the lobby, in their waiting area, while they speak to their superiors so that they could make some alterations to it. An hour and 15 minutes later, 3 marshals standing over me, not just with handcuffs and shackles. They handcuffed, they shackled me, they ran me around, they put me in this room that was maybe 30, 40 degrees for like 3 hours until you feel like your teeth are going to fall out of your mouth because you're so cold. I've never been that cold in my entire life.
Because you wouldn't sign this gag order?
Because I would not sign this gag order. And then they brought in 2 individuals who I recognize as correctional officers from FCI Otisville who drove me back that night.
To prison?
All done by the president and Bill Barr. And that's what I demonstrate in life. What the American people think that they know about me, what they think they know about my case, you don't. And what we do in this book is I show you, and again, not from my words, the words of prosecutors, judges, lawyers, accountants, and so we lay out and show you exactly where all this is going, including the fact that I can't get my own documents from FOIA because it will implicate the entire Department of Justice. In fact, and a guy who I don't particularly care for, meaning Jeff Berman, I don't like anybody at the SDNY, to be honest, but I specifically don't like Jeff Berman. His book that just came out, which I won't buy and I won't read, nevertheless, it validates my book. It's exactly what I've been saying all along, that Trump, Bill Barr, and remember, Bill Barr will do nothing unless Donald Trump told him to do it. Same that happened at the Trump Organization. Bill Barr was exerting pressure on the Southern District of New York to whitewash Trump out of what he should have gone to jail for. Not me. I didn't have the affair. I was just directed and, for the benefit of my boss, to make this payment, to do an NDA.
So you agree with what you understand Berman wrote about Maine DOJ having a 40-page, I think they were the charging documents. They wanted to scrub any reference to individual one, who was Donald Trump, as an unindicted co-conspirator.
And yet they scrubbed about, what, 20 pages, 18 to 20 pages? Right. So, look, I don't give him a pass for any of this. He sat with this information, which I consider to be Brady material. He sat with this for, what, 4 or 5 years? For what purpose? So he had something to write a book about? Destroy my life so that you could profit from it? I don't think so, pal.
What do you see as still unfinished business? I mean, the criminal investigation and the criminal investigators had access to all of the same evidence that Attorney General Tish James marshaled. Why isn't there a criminal prosecution?
And there will be, but
by who?
I believe that there'll be a criminal prosecution by the IRS. I believe there'll be potentially a criminal prosecution by SDNY, especially now that it's not Trump-controlled. And I also believe that there will be other criminal investigations that will be forthcoming. But remember what Donald does. And again, this is all part of the playbook that I am responsible for helping to create. This playbook is delay, delay, delay. The nice part, he's not delaying anything from Tish James. She's not sitting back. She's fully committed, and she'll go down in history as helping.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump just had one of the worst legal days of his entire life, which is saying something. And it comes amidst a set of accelerating threats from local, state, and federal law enforcement. So last night, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, as we reported, issued a unanimous per curiam ruling against the ex-president, overruling a previous decision, widely criticized by a Trump-appointed district judge, saying that the Department of Justice can resume using the 100 classified documents seized from Trump's home in Florida in their investigation into his handling of the sensitive materials. The DOJ has said that this inquiry is related to possible obstruction of justice and Espionage Act violations. Also yesterday, New York Attorney General announced a $250 million civil lawsuit against Donald Trump, his company, members of his family, including 3 of his adult children, accusing them of committing, in her words, a staggering amount of fraud. If that suit is successful, it would bar the Trump Organization from doing business in New York State. All of that comes just weeks after we learned the DOJ issued 40 subpoenas to all sorts of people in Trump's orbit in connection with their investigation into the attempted coup on January 6th. The DOJ has also seized the phones of 2 top advisors to the ex-president, which is interesting. Then there's the fact that Donald Trump's own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is a target of a criminal investigation into election interference in Fulton County, Georgia. The district attorney down in Georgia, in that county there, has sent target letters to several other Trump allies in Georgia, and the grand jury in the case has issued several subpoenas. Then just this afternoon, the special master in that classified documents case ordered Trump's lawyers to state in a court filing whether they believe FBI agents lied about documents seized from mar-a-lago or claimed to have taken items that were not actually in Trump's possession. And all that follows the ex-president's claims on social media and in TV interviews that the FBI planted evidence when they searched his home. Now, this is a 76-year-old man who has essentially bullied and bluffed his way out of jams his whole life. He's a con man, and he's going to con. And apparently no lawyer can get him to shut up, because amidst all of this, Donald Trump went on national television where he sounded like a raving lunatic, totally dissociated from reality, but crucially, fundamentally admitted to the main facts of the crime that the DOJ alleges he may have committed.
If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it, because you're sending it to Mar-a-Lago or to wherever you're sending it. And there doesn't have to be a process. there can be a process, but there doesn't have to be.
The former president ends his week in even deeper legal jeopardy as he tries to cling to political power and control of the GOP. Tonight, the investigation into the classified documents seized at his club in Florida is heating up. Intel officials tell NBC News they have resumed their review of the top secret records as they try to figure out the potential damage to national security. This comes just days after appeals court judges gave the green light for the feds to access the evidence. Remember, it has now been nearly 7 weeks since the FBI search, and Trump has yet to explain what he was doing with the documents in the first place. But his former personal lawyer suggests Trump's motives may have something to do with the many investigations that are all unfolding around him.
Obviously, he took personal memento, so in that way he can show off to people. When he would go thereafter to maybe Saudi Arabia, or he'd show, hey, look, I got this letter from Putin, or I got this from love letter. I mean, who gets love letters, right? From Kim Jong-un. I also believe he took the top secret documents for the sole purpose of using it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. You want to indict me and my family? You want to incarcerate me? I'm going to turn these documents over to our adversaries.
Meanwhile, there's new reporting that Trump's current lawyers, who our cameras caught at a D.C. federal court yesterday, are in a secret battle with the Justice Department. They reportedly are trying to prevent witnesses from testifying to a grand jury about his actions ahead of January 6th. Trump spent this evening holding a rally for North Carolina Republican Senate candidate Ted Budd. And earlier today, several Trump allies launched a new super PAC called MAGA Inc. Politico reports it will spend heavily to support Trump-endorsed candidates in the midterms and beyond. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and President Joe Biden were also focused on messaging ahead of the November election. McCarthy began this morning laying out what he called his party's, quote, commitment to America.
On that very first day that we're sworn in, you'll see that it all changes. We can secure our border. We could become energy independent, where your price of gas is lower. We can build an education system that has a parent's Bill of Rights.
In a rebuttal of sorts that followed, President Biden was focused on what he says is a current threat to American democracy.
MAGA Republicans refused to accept the results of the 2020 election. It's become a litmus test in their party to pledge loyalty to Donald Trump by buying into the big lie. You can't let the integrity of our elections be undermined. Democracy can't survive. It cannot survive. Not a joke. Can't survive when one side believes there's only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated.
GOP candidate problems just keep getting worse and worse and worse amid Republican fears that they have nominated an utterly unelectable slate of candidates. The New York Times is reporting that embattled Georgia Republican nominee for Senate Herschel Walker has misrepresented his company's charitable giving. That's despite claims that 15% of his profits would go to charity. Of the 4 charities contacted by the Times, quote, one declined to comment. The other 3 said they had no record or recollection of any gifts from the company in the last decade. This comes on the heels of new reporting that a Republican running for Congress in Ohio has misrepresented his military service. The AP reporting that J.R. Majewski presents himself as an Air Force combat veteran who deployed to Afghanistan after 9/11. But there is a problem. The AP obtained military documents that show he never deployed to Afghanistan. Let's bring in the Rev. Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, the president of the National Action Network. And our friend Michael Steele is with us, former RNC chairman and an MSNBC political analyst. Michael Steele, reap what you sow. This is all an extension of Mitch McConnell refusing to convict Donald Trump from inciting a deadly insurrection. And so he put in motion this race to the bottom. And I think what's scarier isn't the ones that are faltering, the ones that might slip through.
Exactly, and that is the main point here at the end of the day, Nicole, is the ones who might slip through. We may focus on a bright, shining object here or there with an incredibly untenable backstory and all kinds of legal or personal troubles, but it is the Kerry Lakes of the world that could very easily slip through, the Mastrianos of the world who could slip through. And so the attention level to McConnell's plaintiff plea in the quality of the candidates is real. And it's not just with respect to the ones that are those bright shining objects that, are, fodder for humor, but the ones who aren't, the scarier ones, the ones who are more determined to be the next iteration of Trump. Trumpism has its hold now, Nicole, as you've talked about and covered so aptly over the last few months. It has its hold. It's not just on the GOP, it's on the country. And so you're going to see more and more of these candidates kind of fit into that mold. And that's where those of us who are trying to guard for and on behalf of democracy need to be steadfast.
I mean, I agree with you. The bozos aren't as scary as the ones who can hide their associations with the extremists and with the autocratic policies.
The documents the FBI seized from former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home and club has given the former president's lawyers until next Friday to back up Trump's allegation the FBI planted evidence during the August 8th search. Trump and his attorneys have publicly insinuated many times that agents planted evidence during the search without providing any proof to substantiate that claim. The special master, Judge Raymond Dearie, also telling Trump's legal team it must state by September 30th whether the lawyers believe any of the seized items were incorrectly described in the Justice Department's 11-page inventory list, which stated some of the documents were highly classified. Trump has claimed he declassified the documents found in the search that were marked classified and highly sensitive. However, his lawyers have not made those assertions in court. In yesterday's filing, Judge Dearie also ordered Trump's attorneys to say whether they are claiming that any items on the inventory list were not, in fact, taken from the premises. Special master's order essentially tells Trump's attorneys to back up his claims, writing in part, "This submission shall be plaintiff's final opportunity to raise any factual dispute as to the completeness and accuracy of the detailed property inventory." Joining us now is Washington Post reporter Perry Stein. She covers the Justice Department and the FBI. Perry, good morning. It's good to see you. One has to think, listening to this judge yesterday, this is the guy the Trump team wanted. This was their idea. He's not going light on them, effectively saying, you've made all these wild allegations, back them up.
Exactly. I mean, Judge Dearie is the guy that Trump did. His team got to propose two people, and they proposed Judge Dearie. The DOJ agreed and said, yes, we think he's a suitable choice. And Judge Cannon, that's the judge that said yes to a special master, she appointed him. So this is Trump's choice. And yeah, I mean, he is having Judge Dearie. We've seen this in the hearing and in this latest filing. He is having Trump back up and these claims that he has made on social media and in interviews that Judge Cannon did not.
And so, Perry, if presumably the legal team can't come up with any proof that the FBI planted this evidence or the other claims they made in public but not in court, so what happens when they don't show any evidence for those claims?
I mean, I don't think that they're in trouble if they don't, in terms of legally speaking. I mean, I think the idea from this hearing that I went to on Tuesday, Judge Dearie was trying to clear up any dispute. So he asked them, hey, this is the inventory list that the FBI provided. These are all the documents that they said they seized. Do you have any issues with it? Is this the inventory list we should be working off of? So right now, what he's doing is trying to clear up any disputes that they may have. So it sounds
with a
like
simple rule of legal professionals. In most cases, whenever possible, keep your clients off of TV and avoid letting them do interviews, which usually do more harm than good. Unfortunately for Donald Trump's lawyers, their needy, attention-craving client could only hold out for so long. And so last night on one of his favorite shows, in an interview with his friend, Sean Hannity, he seemed to make a losing argument even worse. In his latest throw spaghetti at the wall defense, or is it throw ketchup at the wall, Trump made this outrageous claim about his magical powers to declassify documents.
If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it, because you're sending it to Mar-a-Lago or to wherever you're sending it. And there doesn't have to be a process. There can be a process, but there doesn't have to be. You're the president. You make that decision. So when you send it, it's declassified. I declassified everything.
Of course, moments earlier, Trump again implied that the FBI may have actually planted those very documents that he supposedly declassified. Unfortunately for Trump, we are not all living in an episode of Bewitched, and he cannot just wiggle his nose and expect classified material to miraculously become unclassified. And even if he could, that would also mean that the material he knowingly declassified included what has been reported as info about a foreign nation's nuclear capabilities. And beyond all of that absurdity, Trump appeared to indicate that he intentionally sent those documents to Mar-a-Lago and perhaps to other places that we don't yet know about. So much for it all just being one big accident. Now, none of this actually helps Trump's legal team, which is also dealing with the news last night of a much-needed course correction from our judicial branch. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals cleaned up the mess created by the Trump-appointed district judge who ruled that Trump apparently had a potential right to the classified documents that he stole from the White House when he left office. In a total repudiation of Judge Eileen Cannon's ruling, a 3-judge panel, 2 of whom were appointed by Trump, sided with the Department of Justice, allowing it to resume using the more than 100 documents in its criminal investigation and removing them from the special master's review. Counter to what Judge Cannon said in her ruling, the Court of Appeals wrote, "For our part, we cannot discern why plaintiff would have an individual interest in or need for any of the 100 documents with classification markings." And to Trump's repeated claims that he just declassified everything magically, like I Dream of Jeannie, the Court of Appeals writes that that argument is irrelevant. Quote, "In any event, at least for these purposes, the declassification argument is a red herring because declassifying an official document would not change its content."
Back in 2013, there was a big scandal involving a Republican governor who had hopes of running for president, and it involved then-Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey and the shutting down of access lanes to the George Washington Bridge in an act of sheer political retribution to a local mayor. The lane closures lasted for days. They caused hours-long traffic jams that delayed buses carrying school kids and commuters trying to get to work, and even emergency vehicles. It was a political stunt that hurt Christie's political aspirations, had real-life consequences for ordinary people. It led to a bunch of people getting prosecuted and even indicted and convicted. Now, at some level, that sounds awfully similar to another political stunt pulled recently by another Republican governor with his eye on the White House. Because last week, Republican Ron DeSantis in Florida used taxpayer money to fly 48 migrants from Texas to an island in Massachusetts. The migrants, including children, were told they were being flown to Boston or Washington, D.C., where they would be given jobs, housing, and educational opportunities, according to a lawsuit some of them filed this week against DeSantis and others. Instead, they were taken to a small island where they were left without food, water, or shelter until residents there learned about their arrival and came to help. Here's the thing. This was a stunt, clearly done to sort of stick it to his political enemies. But the incident is now under investigation by the sheriff of Bexar County, Texas, where the migrants had been living.
I believe that they were preyed upon. Somebody came from out of state, preyed upon these people, lured them with promises of a better life to just be exploited and hoodwinked into making this trip to Florida and then onward to Martha's Vineyard for what I believe to be nothing more than political posturing.
And it is reasonable to ask if the announcement of that investigation might have played a part in DeSantis suddenly canceling a second planned flight of migrants, this time to Delaware, the home state of President Biden. Some great new reporting from the Miami Herald says that they were at it again, that this second group were also asylum seekers from Venezuela, were also promised a flight to a destination where there would be more resources to help them. But instead, their flight, planned for this week, was abruptly canceled. Joining me now is one of the reporters who broke that Miami Herald story, Sarah Blasky. Sarah, it's great to have you on. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from your reporting. Just walk me through what you learned from the folks you interviewed about who these people were, what they were told, how they ended up in a hotel, I believe, waiting for a flight that never came.
So all of these people had remarkably similar stories. All of them came from Venezuela. We talked to at least half a dozen people who were getting on that bus that you showed there a moment ago. And they all said that they had recently come from Venezuela, made the journey up through Central America, across the U.S.-Mexico border, close to here, close to San Antonio, Texas. And then they ended up at the migrant
breaking
resource
news
center.
upon breaking news tonight in the case of Donald J. Trump versus the United States of America. The New York Times is reporting tonight that a former White House counsel warned Donald Trump last year, when he was no longer president, that Mr. Trump could face legal liability if he did not return government materials he had taken with him when he left office. The lawyer, Eric Hirschman, sought to impress upon Mr. Trump the seriousness of the issue and the potential for investigations and legal exposure if he did not return the documents, particularly any classified material. In January, not long after the discussion with Mr. Hirschman, Mr. Trump turned over to the National Archives 15 boxes of material he had taken with him from the White House. Those boxes turned out to contain 184 classified documents, the Justice Department has said. And so now we know the name of one witness, possibly the most important witness, federal prosecutors will call to testify in their grand jury investigation of Donald Trump's possession of those documents, Eric Hirschman. Eric Hirschman will obviously comply with a grand jury subpoena to testify in that case and tell the grand jury whatever he told Donald Trump about those documents. Here is Eric Hirschman fulfilling his duty as a witness for the January 6th committee.
The day after, Eastman, I don't remember why he called me. He started to ask me about something dealing with Georgia. I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Right? I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition. I said, "Good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it."
And Donald Trump needs that great criminal defense lawyer more than ever. If Eric Hirschman tells federal prosecutors the same thing that the New York Times is reporting at this hour tonight, then the chances of Donald Trump being indicted have just skyrocketed. And that is not the only breaking news in this case tonight. Donald Trump's lawyers said in writing tonight, just an hour ago, that they are refusing to answer the question of whether Donald Trump declassified documents seized by the FBI at his Florida home because they are saving their answer to that question as
joining us now is Jim Walden, a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York, who I should note has argued several times in front of Special Master Judge Raymond Dearie in that role. Jim, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So as you look at these two cases, I'll set aside Letitia James's lawsuit for the moment. When you look at Mar-a-Lago and you look at what happened on January 6th, do you think one of these investigations is potentially stronger and can support a criminal indictment against former president rather than the other?
I think the January 6th investigation, both before, during, and after the insurrection, is definitely more red meat. There is going to be more witnesses. There are more aspects of criminality. They cover the country, if you think about it, from Washington, D.C. To Georgia and Colorado. So I think that that's going to take the most time. And Merrick Garland's going to have one shot at this.
Yeah.
They cannot bring successive cases against Donald Trump. That's never going to fly. So I think that they are working hard on everything, but they are going to put together a massive case that puts the former president with a lot of other very unseemly people in a range of crimes.
You have put together what is a very instructive graphic that I will pull up. I will ask our beautiful production team to pull up right now. This is what you see as the sort of the wheel and spokes of a criminal charge, effectively. There are a number of charges that you outline here. Among them, I think two of the most kind of explosive and under-discussed: murder conspiracy, and there you specify Mike Pence. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Trump potentially being involved in murder conspiracy?
So the way you would describe this kind of an investigation is right on point. Prosecutors refer to it as a hub and spoke RICO conspiracy. And at the center of the hub, the round wheel, is all of the primary people. And in the graphic, there are some people named, but literally the people at the center of this were too big to fit on a graphic. So that's really the nerve center of the conspiracy. But as in an organized crime case, which the racketeering law was designed to address, there are all kinds of crimes. Yeah. There's murder, there's extortion, there's gambling, there's prostitution. And the reason that RICO is so powerful is because you can bring all of those crimes together under. And the Pence murder conspiracy, I think, is really fascinating because obviously we don't know all the evidence yet. But what we do know is that at the Ellipse, the president was disparaging Pence. Pence had already communicated that he was not going to stop the election from going forward. Trump tweets, you can see in the videos the crowd surging forward. Mm-hmm. His staff tells him that there are people there saying, hang Mike Pence. The president is reported to say essentially he deserves it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that we don't know.
He knows they're armed. He doesn't want the security systems to be put in
Moments
place.
From now, the former president will stand shoulder to shoulder with Ted Budd, North Carolina's Republican Senate nominee. Budd has refused to say whether he would accept this year's election results, only if he loses. Budd voted against certifying the 2020 presidential election as a member of Congress just hours after the attack on the Capitol. And he's not the only one. From the Carolinas to California, from Cancun to Grant's Tomb, election denialism has infected the Republican organization because they barely act like a party. According to the website 538, 60% of Americans will have an election denier on the ballot this fall. Out of the more than 500 Republicans running for office, nearly a quarter of them have fully rejected the legitimacy of the 2020 election. If you want a preview of just what life would look like with these kinds of folks in control, just take a look at Georgia, where election deniers are now using false claims to challenge the legitimacy of more than 60,000 voter registrations. And they just happen, I know this is shocking, to be voters that are in counties full of black and brown people. These challenges were brought about because Georgia's Secretary of State, the one who's pretending that he stood up for rights, refused to overturn the 2020 election for Trump. But state Republicans, afraid of making the MAGA king and all his other people look angry at them, decided to pledge their allegiance and change state election laws to fix problems that don't exist. Earlier today, the duly elected president of the United States, Joe Biden, just warned how dangerous this election denialism really is.
It's become a litmus test in their party to pledge loyalty to Donald Trump by buying into the big lie. You can't let the integrity of our elections be undermined. Democracy can't survive. It cannot survive. Not a joke. Can't survive when one side believes there's only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated.
One of the most prominent election deniers he's referring to is currently running to control Arizona's elections. Mark Finchem is a Republican nominee for Secretary of State. He's currently a state legislator and actually tried to decertify the Arizona election results back in 2020, but he failed. He's also a member of the Oath Keepers, that right-wing paramilitary group, and he attended the Capitol insurrection. According to Politico, a fellow Republican in the Arizona House was shocked at Finchem's success, given that, quote, Mark is known as the guy that's probably the dumbest, well, there's a long list, but one of the dumbest legislators in the House, with friends like these. Look, last night, Finchem faced off with his Democratic opponent, Adrian Fontes, the former Maricopa County recorder who oversaw the 2020 election for really the entire country. It was a jarring side-by-side of two vastly different perspectives, one grounded in reality and the other grounded in the unhinged fever dreams of the big lie.
Knowing